3 spine-chilling true wilderness horrors exposed. Terrifying secrets hidden in the deep woods. Patrick Miller thought a weekend getaway to Pine Hollow would save his family from the throes of urban chaos. Little did they know, they'd soon plunge into a nightmare doused in shadows and whispering winds. The moment they arrived at their cabin, an oppressive air clung to them, heavy with unseen eyes. Patrick's heart raced as he sensed something amiss, a predator lurking just beyond the veil of tall trees. Just the woods, he told himself, but something felt wrong. Dinner was unusually quiet. As Emily set the table, Jake fiddled with his phone, more interested in texts than his family. Little Lily, innocent and wide-eyed, watched out the window, her small fingers tracing the glass. "Do you hear that, Mom?" The woods are talking. Her innocent words sent a chill racing down Emily's spine. Then they discovered the attic. Jake's interest sparked when he caught sight of old, frayed photographs, faces frozen in either frantic joy or horror. Confusion danced in his eyes, but he shrugged it off. "Just some creepy old pictures," he chuckled, trying to act tough. The flickering light overhead seemed to swirl as he examined them. The echoes of laughter faded, replaced by an unsettled clarity, a heaviness that gnawed at his gut. Soon, they ventured into the woods. The local ranger, Gary, blocked their path with a warning that felt too real. "You need to leave this place before it gets dark." They laughed, but the laughter felt hollow. Something primal warned them. Behind him, the forest loomed, dark and whispering. "It's just a ranger being paranoid," Patrick said, trying to shake the unease. Later that night, in the glow of the fireplace, Lily murmured again, "The trees, they whisper to me." Emily's fingers trembled as she rearranged the plates. "It's just the wind, honey." But dread slowly dripped into her consciousness, and Patrick felt it, too. The cracks in their family began to widen, as cold whispers crawled up their spines. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The next day, panic seized them when Jake vanished during another hike into the woods. "Jake!" they shouted, voices hoarse with fear, the echo lost in the looming trees. Emily felt the panic rise like bile. The landscape morphed into a graveyard of shadows, and strange whispers curled around them, wrapping tighter and tighter. They ran, adrenaline surging, pulse racing. As darkness fell like a shroud, they stumbled upon Gary again. His eyes appeared hollow, expression tight with knowing fear. "You're looking for your boy? He might not be just lost." The woods themselves felt alive, and the wind carried distant, anguished cries. Tension spiraled in their family dynamic, as shadows danced in their minds. Just then, fragments of an age-old story began to unlock in their hearts, connected back to that attic and those grim photographs. Jake's fate entangled with the town's secrets, now revealed as the sinister folklore streamed through their thoughts. As hope flickered, despair took its place. The woods loomed closer, every tree ultimately leading towards the dark heart of Pine Hollow. Were they just the latest victims in the horror story written long before? The question hung heavy in the air as they stumbled deeper into the forest, chills creeping down their spines, trapped in an unimaginable nightmare where the past wouldn't let them go. Emily's heart raced as they pushed deeper into the underbrush, branches scratching at their arms like desperate hands. The forest felt claustrophobic, oppressive, and the pull of shadows threatened to consume them whole. "We have to find him," Patrick urged, his voice strained, each word steeped in panic. They called out again, their voices echoing into the abyss, swallowed by the darkness. The wind howled around them, weaving through the trees. Strange shapes undulated just beyond their vision. The silence that followed their cries was deafening, a heavy blanket that weighed down on them. Emily shivered, her breath visible in the chill. What if something happened to him? She whispered, the fear clawing at her throat. "Don't think like that," Patrick snapped, but he was shaking just as much as she was. "We'll find him." But with every step they took, the woods themselves seemed to conspire against them, roots and thorns tangling in their path. Lily tugged at her mother's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "I want to go home, Mommy." The little girl's voice broke with that simple declaration, echoing the siblings' desperation. Emily dropped to one knee, her heart breaking at the sight of her daughter, so small and vulnerable in this monstrous landscape. "Listen, Lily. We'll find your brother. I promise," Emily said, gathering what strength she had left to comfort the innocent child. The promise felt like a lie, but what choice did she have? Out of the corner of her eye, something shifted, a flicker of movement, and suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance. "Jake?" Patrick's voice rang out, raw with hope. But as they approached, their hearts plummeted. It wasn't Jake. It was a ghastly gray figure, aged and gnarled, skin mottled with something dark, moss or perhaps decay. "Beware," the figure rasped, voice like dried leaves crumbling. "The woods will take what is not theirs." Then it vanished, the air chilling around them. "What was that?" Lily squeaked, clinging tighter to her mother. There was more dread in this encounter than just fear of losing Jake. They needed to move. They pushed forward, adrenaline flowing. But each step felt more treacherous than the last. More whispers surrounded them now, words blending into a sinister tapestry. Emily could hear Jake's name, faint and desperate, lost in the cacophony of calls and cries. "He is close," she muttered under her breath. Then came a sound that cut through the darkness, a scream, piercing and raw. It sent a shock through Patrick, freezing him in place. That was him. "Come on." He took off toward the source, urgency flooding his veins. The woods thickened, branches clawing at their clothes. The screams morphed into laughter, grotesque and mocking. It twisted in their minds, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. "We should turn back," Emily urged breathlessly, but Patrick shook his head resolutely. He couldn't abandon his son, not now. Finally, they stumbled upon a clearing, moonlight spilling through the treetops. In the center stood a wooden altar, covered in old symbols, bloodied offerings strewn around its base. The unease was palpable, and there, sprawled near the altar, lay Jake, unmoving. "Jake!" they shouted, but their voices faltered as the forest erupted with laughter that echoed like a phantasmagoric choir. Patrick ran to his son, dread coiling in his stomach. As he reached Jacob, Emily felt a change in the air, a chill, a heartbeat echoing among the trees. Cut through the mirthful cacophony came a final whisper that sent ice into her veins, resonating in her very soul. "You've come for him, but now you belong to us." Patrick's anguished cries froze in the air as shadows crept closer, wrapping around them like cold fog. They were no longer just searching for Jake. They were ensnared in the very tale that ravaged Pine Hollow, and the darkness had begun to consume them all. What would they do next? Would they give in to the woods, or would they fight their way back to the light? As the night deepened, the horror shrouded them, pulling tighter. Just then, a shadow stirred, and the question loomed: who would be next? The shadows twisted like smoke, narrowing in on Emily and Patrick. Each breath felt heavier, weighted by the unseen forces at work around them. As they moved toward Jake, the altar loomed larger, its grotesque carvings seeming to pulse with unnatural life. Emily could feel the cold kiss of despair wrapping around her limbs, numbing her thoughts. "Jake!" Patrick screamed again, shaking his son desperately. The boy's face was pale and his body lay too still. All around, the mocking laughter intensified, a cruel symphony of despair and taunting that sent tremors through Emily's core. "Please, please wake up," Patrick pleaded, his voice cracking. But all he received was a hollow echo back from the depths of the woods. Emily watched helplessly, the world around her beginning to blur, her vision darkening like the canopy above them. Then, without warning, a sharp gasp escaped Jake's lips. He bolted upright, eyes wide and glazed. "Dad?" he croaked, hardly aware of where he was. And there was something in his voice that sent a chill down Emily's spine. Sounded strange. Wrong. Jake. Oh God. Thank you. Patrick pulled his son tight, relief flooding him. But Emily noticed how Jake's gaze drifted past his father, fixated on the altar's grotesque forms. What did they do to you? She whispered, her voice trembling. What did you say? Jake asked, barely recognizing his mother, eyes sunken and frantic. The laughter faded into a low murmur, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed at their eardrums like a thick fog. I don't remember, he stammered, voice shaking. I heard them, they said they'd take me, that I would stay with them. Stay? Patrick echoed, horror mounting. Stay where? Before Jake could answer, a low rumble cascaded through the clearing, as if the ground itself groaned beneath their feet. The altar's symbols twisted into new shapes, revealing shadows that moved with sinister intentions. The very air vibrated with malice. Lily, wide-eyed, tugged at her mother. Mommy, I'm scared. Her small frame trembled, and Emily tried to pull her closer, but the shadows slithered around her, pulling at her feet with a cold grip. No, no, get away, Patrick yelled, tears streaking his face as he shielded Jake. But the darkness pressed in tighter, flaring with an unholy hunger. We must leave, Emily cried, a spark of determination igniting within her. She grabbed Lilia's hand, yanking her daughter toward the forest's edge. But the shadows seemed alive, twisting their path, ushering them deeper into the darkness. Wait, Patrick shouted. Desperation painted his features as he watched the bond of their family fraying at the edges. I can't leave him. I want tea. Patrick, she screamed, panic flaring up her throat. We have to go now. Now. Skyward. The moon shone down, drenched in blood red. It was a ghastly backdrop to their fight for survival as tendrils of shadow lashed out at them. As Jake rested his trembling fingers against the altar's carved surface, his expression shifted. A sinister grin spread across his face, terrifyingly foreign. Let us stay forever, he whispered, seeming to merge into the darkness itself. Emily froze, her heart plummeting. That wasn't he, her son. What had the woods taken from them? In one swift movement, Patrick lunged, grabbing Jake's shoulder. No, this is not who you are. But it was too late. The shadows surged forward, enveloping Jake's figure as he wrenched away, grinning wider, eyes glinting with a dark promise. Come join us, a chorus of wailing voices called from the depths, tantalizing and beckoning. Emily felt the lingering touch of a cold hand stroke her hair, a whisper curling around her ear. You belong to us now. As terror filled the air with a heavy fog, they stumbled backward, hearts racing. The woods, alive, pulsed around them like a heart ready to beat for another soul. But from the shadows, a sudden rustling brought a leaf-strewn branch crashing down. They spun around to see a figure emerging from the woods, a familiar face twisted in shadows, eyes wide with an incomprehensible warning. Get out. They're coming for all of you. The words ripped through the suffocating fear, tearing at the fabric of their reality. Who was this new figure? And what would they do next? Now trapped in the dark ritual of Pine Hollow, Emily's heart raced, fear clawing at her throat. The figure stepping out of the shadows was unmistakable Abigail, their neighbor, her face a mask of terror and pleading. You need to run, she shouted, her voice strained and hoarse. Abigail? Patrick gasped, bewilderment flooding his features. What are you doing here? The laughter, the maddening whispers suddenly quieted, replaced by an ominous stillness, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Abigail's eyes darted, wild with panic, glancing back at the vast darkness from whence she came. They know you're here, they're always watching, she stammered, breathless. I shouldn't have tried to warn you. Warn us about what? Emily pulled Lily closer, sensing the encroaching dread around them. The altar? Abigail whispered, her voice trembling like leaves in a storm. It's a gateway to something horrible. The woods are alive. They want to keep you. As the shadows surged, twisting through the air like hungry vipers, Jake that wasn't Jake anymore began to sway, as if drawn by an unseen force. Join them, Mommy, he called, voice blissful yet laced with something dark. We can be together forever. Shut up, Patrick yelled, stepping forward to shield Emily and Lily. But it was like pushing against a wall of water, pointless. With each moment, Jake seemed more a part of the creeping darkness, more a captive of the altar's malignancy. Leave him, Emily screamed, desperation powering her words. Yes, not our son. Not anymore. The hollow laughter erupted again, echoing through the clearing, cold and full of malice. The shadows danced eagerly, emboldened by their fear. Each face carved into the altar distorted, grotesque joy shining through them, a celebration of their impending doom. Come on, Abigail urged, grabbing Patrick's hand, pulling him hard from the grasp of shadows creeping forth. We need to get to the edge of the woods. They can't cross the boundaries once the sun rises. But even as she spoke, dark figures began to slither from the very trees themselves, merging with the earth's shadows, their features becoming one with the terrain. I can't leave him, Patrick shouted, ripping his hand away, his heart breaking. Yes, my son. Your son is lost, Abigail cried, staring into the depths where Jake stood. We have to go now. Suddenly, the air crackled, a sharp cold zipping through Emily's veins. We'll come back for him, she insisted, the warmth of conviction battling the icy grip of fear. Yet the viciousness of the shadows threatened to yank them into irreversible depths. Jake, she shouted one last time, the desperation lacing her heart. But the boy merely grinned wider, his gaze transfixed on the altar, enveloped in darkness, beckoning him homeward. Come join us, they echoed, over and over again, in voices that felt familiar yet distant. The cacophony swelled, mingling with the rhythmic beating of their hearts until their sound began to drown everything out. Terror surged within Emily as she felt twig-like fingers clawing at her, roots bursting from the earth to pull at her legs. They had to leave this place, but which direction? Shadows stretched, distorting their vision. Now, Abigail yelled as she pulled Emily and Lily away, darting through the trees, urgency pushing their feet onward. Patrick hesitated a moment longer, then turned, swallowing hard, chasing after them. As they stumbled deeper into the woods, the laughter faded just slightly, but the impending dread hung thick. They had escaped for now, but each breath felt like a precursor to the inevitable. In the distance, the maddening calls continued, and through the thickening trees, Emily could swear she heard whispers from Jake echoing through the darkness. Forever, 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 was there any hope left? As they plunged further into the wild, the trees seemed to close in tighter, shadows dancing in their wake. It was hard to tell where the path was leading them. All they could do was run. But were they running toward salvation, or simply deeper into the wood's malign embrace? An intense crashing broke through the silence. Behind them, what was pursuing them now? And as they reached a clearing, panic surged. Would they find an escape or just another trap waiting to ensnare their souls? The clearing was alive, buzzing with a tension that squeezed Emily's lungs. Shadows twisted among the trees, flickering like angry flames. It felt like the woods were moving, shifting around them, breathing in sync with their fear. Which way? Emily shouted, panic tightening her chest. The woods seemed to whisper in response, tugging at her mind, pulling her toward the dark underbelly of the night. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break down and sob for Jake. We have to keep moving, Abigail urged, her eyes darting anxiously, searching for any sign of safety. The jagged rocks jutted out of the ground, threatening to trip them at every turn as they stumbled away from the haunting altar. Patrick looked back, instinct screaming at him to save Jake, but the weight of despair pulled him back. We can't leave him, he yelled, a low tremor breaking through his voice. Just below the surface, the shadows felt taunting, laughing at their struggle to escape. Jake is gone, Emily yelled, her heart shattering with each word. We have to survive. The shadows seemed to pulse, hungry for their pain. The laughter? It shifted, becoming something more sinister, a chorus of the lost echoing through the air. Keep your voices down, Abigail snapped, fear lace pooling on her skin. but even her harsh tone felt punctured by uncertainty. What if the darkness was listening? As they pressed forward, thick brambles scraped at their legs, reaching out like fingers grasping for them to stop. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. She felt the cold helium touch of something glide along her cheek. She swatted it away, but it lingered, just beyond her vision. "Can you hear that?" Lily whispered, her soft voice trembling as if she sensed the impending doom. "Hear what?" Emily asked, trying to mask her rising dread. "The voices of the trees." Both Abigail and Patrick froze. Emily felt her stomach drop as the resounding laughter from earlier began to seep through the air again, echoing among the twisted branches. "They're calling for us, for everyone who entered. They want us." Emily's heart raced. "We're not going to listen to them. We're running." Yet, as they ran, the forest seemed to conspire against them, branches snapping back like angry hands, twisting into snarling faces, taunting them with every desperate leap. And then came the whisper, the familiar voice that chilled her to the bone. "Mommy, come play." Emily stumbled, panic clawing at her mind. "Jake!" she cried out, the sound choking her. The shadows grew thicker, swirling tighter. Was it real or just her frantic mind? "Emily, stay focused," Abigail shouted, grabbing her arm, urging her to move. "We can't stop." But deep in the darkness, silhouettes began to take shape. The shadows not only beckoned but started to form. Ethereal figures emerged, flickering with a dark glow. Were they trapped souls or monstrous echoes of what once lived? "Run!" Patrick screamed, pulling Emily and Lily through an unseen path. But desperation fueled their wild escape. They barely managed to dodge the tendrils reaching out, trying to pull them back into the embrace of the waiting darkness. As they broke through into the next cluster of trees, they collided with a fence, old and crooked, barely visible in the dark. An opening. It was an exit, but covered in thick vines and surrounded by a wall of screaming shadows. The whispers turned to screams, a desperate cacophony clawing at their minds. "Help us! Don't leave! Join us!" "No!" Emily shouted, fighting for clarity as she pushed against Patrick and Abigail. They pulled and twisted, trying to find a solid grip on reality, an anchor in the madness. But the ground trembled. An earth-shattering roar erupted in the distance, shaking the very roots beneath them. Something was coming. Something bigger than the shadows. "Go!" Abigail yelled, shoving them forward into the gap in the fence. They threw themselves through, but the echoes of Jake's voice enticed them back. Just as they turned to run, the last rays of sunset faded, plunging them into complete darkness. Emily's breath hitched, fear morphing into icy paralysis. "Are we safe?" But even as she asked, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Shadows swirled around them like a storm, brightening for one piercing moment. With horror, she realized the dark figures were not just remnants but shadows of those lost before. They were being watched, and the forest was ready to claim them. The abyss behind them yawned wide, tendrils clawing through the darkness. And in that space, a sickening thought pierced through. What if Jake wasn't lost? What if he had already joined them? Were they running toward freedom or straight into the arms of something far worse? They had to make a choice. Would they confront the evil spread out like a net behind them, or backtrack to the altar that had ensnared their son? With the shadows creeping closer, an unsettling truth loomed. The night wasn't over yet, and a decision must be made before dawn arrived. What would they choose? The darkness around Emily twisted like a living thing, shifting in and out of focus, hungry for their very essence. She could feel it pressing against her skin, sliding through her mind, whispering all the terrifying possibilities. Which way now? Patrick's voice cracked, filled with a tension that mirrored Emily's own inner dread. He was looking around wildly, searching for a glimmer of salvation, but the forest seemed to have swallowed every bit of light. There's got to be a path somewhere. Emily shrieked. Her voice echoed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown to something dreadful. Behind them, the fence loomed tall, a jagged guardian keeping them from returning to the altar or whatever hellish nightmare awaited them if they turned back. Shadows reached out from the trees, curling like dark smoke, and the whispers grew louder, a disharmonious chant of despair. They could almost make out words, calls for them, taunts laced with amusement. "We can't stop," Abigail insisted, her voice urgent and thin, all flustered desperation. But it was the shadows that paused them, just for a moment. Emily couldn't help it. She turned back, eyes straining against the dense dark. What if Jake was out there, just past the veil of flickering terror? Then she saw it. A glint, a tiny flash of something, just a few feet under the shadows. Fear gripped her as she squinted harder. Was it a trick of the night? "Emily," Patrick's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to move." With a jerk, she tore her gaze away, forcing her feet forward as her mind screamed in conflict. They ran on, trying to outrun the darkness that hugged at them like cold fingers wrapped in a clawing embrace. The forest was alive. It watched, waited, each step sinking them deeper into its cold grasp. Every rustle echoed in her ears. Was it just the wind, or were there watchers among the trees? Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted, as if the earth pulsed with the energy of a million trapped souls. Emily stumbled but regained her footing. The shadows around them morphed, shifting rapidly, showcasing horror-filled faces, lined with torment and agony. Time stretched, and with wretched breaths, they pressed onward, fighting against visible fear incarnate. Just ahead, they spotted a faint light seeping through the tree line. Hope surged through Emily's veins. Was that safety? But with every step they took, the light dimmed, flickering like a discouraged star. The whispers intensified, swirling together into an awful, guttural sound that felt like the very air was being torn apart. "Can you feel it?" Lily gasped, her face pale, reflecting the terror clutching the trio like a vice. They're angry." "Yes, angry," Abigail confirmed. "Whatever we do, don't listen to the shadows. They're trying to trap us. Just a little farther." Emily cried, urging her legs to keep moving. But doubt clawed at her insides. What if they were running straight into the jaws of the beast? Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the air. It was close, impossibly close. They froze, hearts racing. It was neither human nor beast, but a sound ripped with anguish, echoing in a way that felt both familiar and deeply disturbing. "Jake?" Emily's voice trembled, and the name hung in the air like an unfurling tapestry of dread. Was he somewhere nearby? Was he part of this insanity? "Emily, focus. We need to go," Patrick shouted, pulling at her arm. But her gaze was locked onto the darkness ahead. That scream had come from the shadows. It had to mean he was close. With renewed resolve, she pushed past hesitations. "We have to find him. We can't lose him too." They charged forward, weaving through trees that seemed to close in around them, leaves whispering warnings. But just as they broke free of a tight thicket, they skidded to a stop. Before them lay the remnants of what was once a campsite, now chillingly abandoned. A flickering fire was still burning softly, its warmth a cruel joke against the icy fear that gripped their hearts. In the haunting glow, there lay objects. Strewn across the ground, lost toys, plush animals, a small, tattered blanket. Her heart sank. This can't be Jake. But before she could process the implications, shadows coiled around them, shrieking into existence with a life of their own, demanding attention, demanding sacrifice. The forest roared. "Run!" Abigail screamed, but Emily's feet were glued to the ground, eyes locked onto something in the darkness, something moving, something almost human but wrong. "Jake!" she cried once more, desperation gripping her throat. The darkness throbbed, anticipating her next move. And then, from the depth of those shadows, the voice returned, sweet yet beckoning. "Mommy, come play." What would they risk to find out the truth? As shadows closed in, a sickening thought bloomed in Emily's mind. What if Jake was the key to the nightmare, the answer to the madness? What if facing him meant they could never return? The shadows shivered and rolled like smoke, tightening around Emily and her friends as if the very air had thickened into a living being, hungry and eager to claim them. The flickering firelight cast eerie silhouettes on the ground, dancing grotesquely, mimicking the twisted forms of the terror lurking in the underbrush. "Emily, we need to go. Now." Patrick's urgency drove into her like a knife, but the echo of Jake's voice anchored her to the spot. Who had ever called her mommy like that? Felt wrong, so wrong, yet achingly familiar. "Please come play." The voice lured her deeper, a melody twisted into a chilling symphony of deceit. It beckoned with an innocence that now felt like poison. "Don't listen to it," Abigail shouted, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The girl's panic was palpable, radiating off her in waves, but Emily was entranced, captured in a web of her fears and memories. Wasn't this what they had come for? The shadows stretched, twisting and coiling as if they could sense her resolve wavering. Something lurked just beyond the veil, a shape, swaying ever so slightly. Another cry emerged, this one sharp and distressed, slicing through the air. "Help! Emily!" It wasn't just Jake. They weren't lost in a forest of ghosts. There were other voices, overlapping like whispers in a crowded room, each one echoing with heartache. "They're here." The shadows shrieked, an intoxicating blend of fear and fury. "You wanted him back." Suddenly, with a jolt, Emily snapped her gaze back to the campsite where a doll lay forgotten, smudged and dirty, its once vibrant eyes now clouded and hollow. Her heart sank as the implications crashed upon her. These are other kids. They never left. "Emily, move!" Patrick yanked her arm, bringing her back to reality. The shadows roared, pushing against them, clawing like desperate hands. With a guttural sound, Emily wrenched herself free from her trance. They turned to run, but the shadows stirred, loose and mocking, pulling the trees closer as if they dared them to break through the suffocating thickness. "Oh God!" Abigail shrieked, dodging a phantom limb that lashed out from the dark. "The way is blocked. We're trapped. They want us to stay." Terror coursed through Emily like ice water. "We have to find another way." She scanned the forest for any sign of escape, her mind racing. What if this was a trap, a game to lure them in? But they had to keep going. They had to find Jake. Together, they dashed around the campsite, frantically searching for an exit as unseen eyes bore down upon them, judgment lingering in the air. All the while, the shadows teased, whispers swirling around their ears. "Stay and play, stay forever, keep running." Patrick's shout pierced through the cacophony of taunts. They scrambled to the left, and just as despair began to seep into their veins, they spotted a glimmer of hope, a narrow path barely visible through the tangled underbrush. Without hesitation, they bolted toward it, every step fueled by the urgency of their survival. But even as their feet crashed against the leaves, something lurched in the darkness, barreling toward them with a primal rage. "Emily!" Patrick shouted, panic suffusing his tone. Something clawed at his ankle, and he stumbled, almost falling. "Go! Go!" Abigail cried, tugging him forward just as a shadow lunged from the darkness. Emily made a split-second decision, looking back at Patrick. "We can't leave." But the sound of pounding feet echoed as they fled down the path, shadows ripping through the air behind them. The haunting calls intensified, a discordant roar of laughter surrounding them, seeming to revel in their terror. Emotions clawed at Emily's heart as she felt Jake slipping further away. As they burst through a bramble, they found themselves at the edge of a clearing lit by a faint moonlight, illuminating an old, decrepit well. But before they could process, the earth shifted again. A deep, resonating growl erupted from the depths of the forest. An icy shiver shot down Emily's spine. What had they awakened? The flickering shadows bounced off the surrounding trees, churning with anger, and she realized in horror whatever it was coming for them. "Run into the clearing!" Abigail screamed. But as they surged forward, Emily caught a glimpse of something at the bottom of the well, a figure too familiar, too haunting. "Jake!" she called, her heart piercing with the weight of that single name. But the shadows surged faster, hungry for vengeance. What had they stumbled upon? Could they escape before the past swallowed them whole? The air turned electric, charged with an ominous force as Emily's voice reverberated in the clearing. The name hung there, suspended in time, morphing into a beacon for the shadows. Jake! The memory of his laughter collided with the darkness, insisting on being heard. Abigail grasped Emily's arm, her face as pale as the moonlight. We can't just, but the frantic edge in her voice was lost to the night. The shadows writhing around the trees seemed to throb, pulsating with malevolent energy, and a chilling wind danced among them. Patrick, still staggered from the brush with whatever dark entity had clutched his ankle, staggered forward. What do we do? His eyes darted between the well and the encroaching shadows, the flickering firelight behind them dying slowly like a heartbeat without rhythm. Emily's heart thudded loudly in her chest as she envisioned what lay in the well's depths. We need to get him out, she cried, determination flooding her senses despite the terror gnawing at her. She took a step towards the well, the cold earth sinking beneath her feet like quicksand eager to consume her. The laughter grew louder, swirling in chaotic whispers, echoing her thoughts. Come play, come back, she hesitated, a surge of grief pooling in her throat. What if Jake wasn't alone down there? What if whatever had taken him was merely waiting for her, too? Just then, a dreadful scream sliced the night. Abigail. Emily spun around in horror. From the darkness, wreathed in shadow, emerged a figure. Lurking with cunning, eyes glinting like shards of ice in the dead of night, it lunged at Abigail. No! Emily screamed, her voice cracking. The other girl was knocked to the ground, panic flooding Emily's veins as icy fingers of fear clasped at her throat. Help! Abigail's voice was muffled, lost in the weight of the darkness. The shape dissolved back into the shadows, but not before Emily caught a glimpse of its twisted grin. Get back! Patrick yelled, pulling Emily away from the well. They needed to run, to escape whatever horror had emerged from the abyss. The three of them retreated further into the clearing, panting with dread. We can't leave her, Emily insisted, stricken with anguish. She has gone, Emily. We'll only end up like her. He was frantic, glancing over his shoulder as the shadows gathered tightly, churning like a tempest. Let me go. She pulled away, heart pounding with urgency. How could she abandon Abigail to whatever darkness awaited? Fear clawed at her, twisting her insides. Emily, please. Patrick tugged her backwards again, eyes locked in terror. We have to find a way out now. But the words turned sour on her tongue as the shadowed edges of the clearing pulsed again, sinister and inviting. They could feel the crescendo of the darkness closing in, a tide of despair that threatened to drown them. Wait, Emily gasped, catching a breath of courage. The well, if it has something to do with Jake, maybe it can help us. Without thinking, she sprinted back towards it, driven by the desperate hope that beneath the darkness lay an answer. But as she neared, the ground trembled, and the air thickened with malevolence, something rising from the depths of the well with a promise of doom. From the bowels of that ancient structure, a glimmer of movement caught her eye. A small hand reached out, pale and fragile. Mommy, the word echoed, haunting and distorted, morphing into a loathsome wail that rippled through the clearing. Emily froze. The shadows seemed to laugh, swirling faster, tightening their grip as if sealing her fate. No! She screamed, horror-filled tears streaming down her face. Run! Patrick's voice tore through her despair, slicing through the weight of dread. But as she turned, the realization sank in what had they done to provoke this nightmare? And what of the souls trapped, yearning for release? A breathless moment held their fate captive as despair gnawed away at their resolve. The deep growl that first echoed through the woods returned, now a war cry awakening the ancient wrath of the dark. Emily sprinted back to her friends, shadows clawing at their heels. But the question loomed heavy in her mind: if they escaped this horror, would they ever truly be free of it? Where do we go? She gasped, panic rising as they stumbled on the edge of the clearing, trapped between darkness and ghostly echoes. The well's mouth grinned wider, waiting to consume them whole. But as the shadows merged into a greater form, something else shimmered in the abyss, a flicker of light, a promise amid the malevolence. Was that hope, or a final trap meant to ensnare them? Emily took a shaky breath, her heart racing. We have to move now, As they bolted deeper into the forest, would they ever escape the dark specters of their past? Or was the forest destined to swallow them whole? They ran, limbs pumping, hearts pounding like war drums against their chests. The forest enveloped them, shadows expanding and colliding like a dark sea chasing after their heels. Emily gripped Patrick's hand, each of their breaths mingling in fear, desperate to cover the distance between them and the cursed well behind them. Branches clawed at their skin, as if the very woods were alive with malevolence, determined to pull them into the night. "Where are we going?" Patrick gasped, his voice trembling with dread. "I don't know," Emily replied, voice raw. Just keep moving." With each step, the laughter echoed through the trees, mocking, taunting. "Come play," it whispered, a threat wrapped in the guise of innocent nostalgia, as if the forest had known their joyful moments, twisting them into a grotesque jest. A flicker of light pulsed in the distance. Emily squinted, straining her eyes against the oppressive night. The source shimmered like a beacon, darting between the trees. "That way," she shouted, pointing, her gut twisting with uncertainty. They sprinted toward the light, stumbling over roots and stones, hearts locked in a frantic rhythm. The laughter from the shadows grew louder, more insistent, as if something unseen was trailing them, gaining ground. They didn't dare look back. They couldn't. Just as they reached what appeared to be a clearing, the light vanished. Emily whipped around, breathless, only to find a wall of darkness before them. Where did it go? Patrick's voice, barely a whisper, trembled. Anxiety clamped down on Emily's chest. It's gone. Can't just disappear." The darkness shifted, churned a palpable presence that made their skin crawl. In the profound stillness that followed, they heard it again, a chorus of whispers, escalating like a horror movie soundtrack. Come join us, Patrick's eyes filled with panic. "We need to hide." He grabbed Emily's arm, dragging her toward the nearest tree, a gnarled old oak, its roots twisting like snake skeletons. They ducked behind it, pressing against the rough bark, as their breathing turned ragged and tight. As they crouched in the shadows, the air around them thickened, laden with tension and malice. The whispers crept closer, impossibly intimate. Emily could barely make out words, a churning mix of fear and despair. "Help me, help us," she clamped her hands over her ears, trying to block them out. But the voices seeped into her mind, relentless. "You cannot escape, you are already ours." The silence outside their makeshift shelter hung heavy until a sudden rustle broke the fragile quiet. Emily's heart raced. Was it the shadows? Or had something else stirred? Peering around the tree, her view fell on something moving in the dark. A figure lumbered, blurred shapes melding together in a grotesque dance. "Abigail?" Emily whispered, but the figure was too misshapen, too twisted. "Get back," she hissed at Patrick, who was still transfixed by the sight. Shadows stroked the ground at the creature's feet, edging closer to them, reaching, clawing. Fear froze them for a moment longer, but then the apparition turned. Its eyes glinted maliciously, glowing with an unholy light that pierced through their hiding spot. Emily felt herself sway under that gaze, like a moth drawn to the flame. "We have to go," Patrick finally urged, his whisper urgent. With one last frightened glance, they darted away from the tree line, running deeper into the woods, spurred by an instinct to survive. But every footfall echoed with the laughter of the lost, a haunting serenade that reminded them of the faces they were leaving behind. "Emily, what if they're the ones trapped?" Patrick said haltingly, terror framing his features. "What if they're all calling for help but don't?" Emily cut him off, her voice rising higher than intended. "We can't think about that. We need to keep moving." They bounded through oncoming branches, desperate to escape the shadows. Yet, with each passing second, that ethereal voice grew stronger, weaving around them like a vine. They could feel Abigail's absence, a tangible loss, pulsing in the air. And in that moment, Emily's hope wavered. "Where do we go?" she cried out, feeling the pull of despair. Just then, an unmistakable glow flickered in the distance. Maybe it's that light again. But as they sprinted towards it, the ground trembled beneath them, a low growl resonating through the underbrush that sent ice-cold shivers surging down their spines. And before they could reach the light, a rumble echoed deep, primal. The forest quaked around them, nature itself bending to some unseen force. Would the woods swallow them whole before they ever reached that glimmer of salvation? The shadows tightened, greedily grasping at their escape, as Emily felt the weight of the past closing in. And the question hung heavy in the air, what if the darkness didn't want them to leave? The forest tightened around Emily and Patrick like a noose, shadows swirling and shushing beneath the branches. Desperation clawed at them, a primal fear urging them to keep moving. This way, Emily shouted, pushing towards the flickering light that glimmered like salvation through the thicket. They burst through the underbrush into a vast clearing, and there it was, a shimmering figure of light rising from an ancient stone, glistening with an ethereal glow. But their joy was short-lived. The air thickened with untold dread, and the shadows quivered in response to their proximity to the light. Is that? Patrick's voice trembled, watching as the light pulsed, beckoning them forward. Emily's heart raced. Her instinct drew her to it, hoping beyond hope that it might be a portal to freedom, a way to heal the sense of desolation that had seeped into their bones. But from the edges of the clearing, darkness spilled forth, swirling, coiling, desperate to snuff out glimmers of hope. They're coming, Emily shouted, her own panic seeping through the cracks of her courage. Just then, a scream shattered the air, echoing as a chorus of anguished cries followed. Abigail's voice seemed to mingle with the shadows, a haunting melody filled with sorrow, pulling them back into the darkness that threatened to consume them. Emily spun around, searching for the source, but all she saw were faces in the shadows, worn, wrinkled, pleading. Abigail, Patrick yelled, anguish ringing in his voice. The shadows twisted, reaching out, as if to ensnare them in a web of despair. Listen, Emily urged, her heart pounding against her chest. We have to focus on the light. It's our chance. But it could be a trap, Patrick cautioned, doubt lacing his tone. Yet before they could strategize, figures emerged from the dark, a grotesque assembly of lost souls, moaning and pleading as they pressed closer, drawn toward the promise of the light. Help us, don't leave us, they cried, voices mingling into a cacophony that forced tears to prick at Emily's eyes. Join us, no, she cried out defiantly. We want to be like you. The resolve fell over her like armor, shielding her against the weight of their sorrow. The shadows hesitated, swirling like mist, and for a moment, the air lightened, allowing Emily and Patrick a shred of hope. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed Patrick's arm, pointing at the stone. We go now. Together, they bolted toward the light, the eerie whispers clawing at them, echoing like tambourines of doom. The figures tried to lunge, but the silhouettes grew fainter as they eclipsed into the blinding glow. At the stone, the light enveloped them, wrapping them in warmth and a sense of peace. But as they stepped closer, a rush of wind twisted around them, the shadows closing in, furious, seething, a palpable force pushing against their backs. Hold on, Patrick shouted as they breached the boundary, the warmth flaring up around them like a protective shell. Emily's heart soared, but with one last powerful scream from the shadows, the bond of their fears tethered them tight, a chilling reminder of what they were leaving behind. Just then, the warmth became blinding, cutting through the darkness as the forest howl faded into a still silence. Stripped of its menacing presence, time seemed to hang as they repressed their racing hearts and looked around. They were back at the cabin. Dawn broke with a soft radiance, illuminating everything. But the horror didn't lift. It had followed them. Echoes of darkness lurked in the corners of their minds, haunting the edges of their lives. Is it over? Patrick whispered, a lingering fear still gripping him. Not entirely, Emily said, breath shaking as she looked toward the woods. They had escaped, but the shadows would always find their way home. Suddenly, Lily emerged from the cabin, her small figure appearing fragile against the dawn's glow. Mommy, she called, arms outstretched. Emily rushed toward her, enveloping her in a fierce embrace, the warmth of her daughter grounding her distress. Are you okay? Emily's voice quaked, the relief crashing over her like a tidal wave. Yes, I was scared, but I saw you, Lily exclaimed, smiling innocently, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had surged through the woods. Patrick knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both of them tightly. Let us never go back there, he said, his voice heavy with a newfound resolution. Emily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. They may have escaped the woods, but the shadows of Pine Hollow would rest uneasily in their memories, haunted but alive. As the sunlight spilled across the cabin, illuminating a future they thought briefly lost to darkness, Emily gazed into the distance. We'll be okay, we have each other. They would carry the shadows of the past, yes, but their hearts beat stronger together. And that was a victory in itself, one she would never take for granted again. But deep down, as they turned away from the woods, a low whisper barely caught the breeze, the forest watching, waiting, holding its breath for the next time curiosity would lead someone too close. A resolve ignited within her, she'd make sure they never returned to those haunted trails again. So now, I implore you, listen carefully. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support for even more exclusive tales of suspense and adventure. Don't wait even one more second. Smash that like button now to keep the algorithm thriving. Flood the comments section with your reactions. What did you think of the ending? Do you think they ever truly escaped the shadow of Pine Hollow? And share this video immediately with at least 5 friends who need this spine-tingling conclusion in their lives. Show you care. Show your interest. Join the community and keep the stories alive.